Hello, Sarah. Welcome to my podcast and my YouTube channel. I'm very happy you are here with us today. I have listened to some of your YouTube videos, and I think they are so important to my audience. Today, I chose to talk about anxiety, but I know you are a specialist in nonviolent communication. You talk about constellations, which has to do with families, and we can talk a little bit about that too. You are a neuroscience educator and also an author. Your book is called Your Resonant Self, Guided Meditations and Exercises to Engage Your Brain's Capacity for Healing. I'm so glad you talk about this, and I'm so glad you write about it, because many times we don't believe and we don't know, we don't have the knowledge about how healing our brains can be, right? So
Thank you,
let's talk
Polly.
about
Yes.
today. Let's dive into that today, okay?
Yeah, I'd love to. And thank you. And thank you for your beautiful work with this podcast and just sending a great shout out and lots of warmth to everybody who's either in this struggle of having suicide come as a possible solution and also bowing to the families of folks who have experienced this loss of their family members or struggle with keeping their family members alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your words. Let's talk about constellation, because
Okay.
that's something that I'm sure many people don't know what that is. I have never
Mm,
worked. Well, we do it as therapists. You always work with families, and that's what it's related to.
yeah,
But can you explain a little bit what constellation work is?
absolutely. So each of us is a system. We're a system that has many levels. I have a level of being just sort of an ordinary person. I have a level of being a brain. How does my brain work? I have a level of being a Sarah within a family system. My children, my parents, grandparents, great grandparents. Here I am, this convergence. I'm part of a system with my husband, which we've co-created our family together. And that's the convergence of two family systems. And how does that affect our children? And I'm also a member of like the society, the world, history. You know, I'm a US citizen. It's during a time of pandemic, but I have family members who died in the 1918 influenza. So, I mean, there's like lots of ways that history rolls through our bodies.
Layers and layers.
Mm.
Yeah.
And we can even look, you know, how the DNA is a double helix twist. There's a protein layer around the DNA that actually shows what our families have lived through in terms of the tragedies and the traumas of the world. Just, you know, how you can cut a tree, you can saw a tree down and you can look at the rings in the tree trunk and they tell you what the different years were like for the tree. When was there a lot of water and nourishment? When was it a bad year? You can see it in the rings. In humans, we can see the DNA in the protein sheath around the DNA, something very similar. This is the work of Moshe Gif, who lives and works in Montreal. He's a Canadian epigeneticist, and his work is beautiful. And he says in the next 40 years, we'll be able to read the history of our family's movement through time and world
Wow.
events in this protein sheath. Now, why is this of interest to people who have suicidal ideation or who struggle with suicide or have had it in their family? This is important because the deaths of the people behind us, we carry within us in this marker. And when we have unresolved connections with death, it pulls us toward death as a solution. So
Wow.
our bodies can be pulled by transgenerational trauma toward death as if it were a good solution. Almost sometimes it's even to join those who have gone before us. I
Mhm.
was doing a piece of work with a young man in Europe whose father had committed suicide when the young man was 16 and he was 30 and he was struggling with suicidal ideation. And we worked for some time. And then one day it was particularly strong. And I said to him, I just wonder if there's a part of you that wants to join your father, that doesn't want to stay here without him. And he said, yes, yes. All of a sudden he said, I think that's true. There's a part of me that wants to go with him. And so, we there's a kind of work I do that comes from constellation work that's called unconscious contract work. And in unconscious contract work, we see what we can name that we've never named before about deep relational needs that we're trying to meet with different things like suicidality. So his contract was, I, George, solemnly swear to my essential self that I will do everything I can to join my father so that he is not alone,
Mm.
no matter the cost to myself.
Wow.
And when he named that, he began to cry. And then he said, well, it's very true, but it's not what I want. It's not how I want to live. I
Mm-hmm.
release myself from this contract. I revoke this vow. I give myself the blessing to know that my father is well accompanied and that I will come to him when my time is right, but not before.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
so
so
powerful.
it's very beautiful. It's a very
It's
beautiful way
beautiful.
to begin. And that's actually the focus of my new book that's coming out.
Uh-huh.
It's coming out in June or July of 2021. So
Mm-hmm.
another little under a
I'm
year,
sure,
and that'll be out in the
yeah,
world.
I'm sure you're going to have great stories. But you were
Mm,
talking about this, and what came to mind for me was I've had people come to me and I think the most interesting one was this man in his at the time his 40s, yeah, for in his 40s, and he was talking to me about this anxiety that he was feeling and this
mm,
uneasiness that he was feeling because and he could pinpoint where that came from. He said, Paula, it's so strange. I have a great life. I've never thought about suicide, just never crossed my mind. But next year is the year that my father, so next year I'm going to be 40 something, and that's when my father took his life. I practically didn't meet my father because when he died I was 1 or 2 at the time, so I have no memory of my father. I had no contact with my father, but I can't get that out of my mind, and it's giving me this uneasiness and a little bit of anxiety. And I know I don't have ideation, but still they're bothering me.
mm,
It's the same as you were talking. It just comes. It's in your DNA. We
mm,
know that trauma epigenetics. I love epigenetics, and for my listeners, do some research on it because it's really interesting. It's like a new field that we're studying now and understanding that what we feel sometimes comes from other generations. It's not just the color of your skin that comes with DNA. I mean, everything comes with it. So, but I had never thought about what you just said. This, of course, it can come with DNA, but this wish to join, and because he felt, as you said, that his father was alone, that's
yeah.
very powerful. Yeah, and
Our love is so enormous. We don't even we often don't think of it. We're not like, okay, how is my love fueling my idea that suicide would be a good idea? It's like
yeah.
we rarely ask that question, yet that is the primary question that needs to be asked. Who do I love? Who do I want not to be alone? Um, how do I want to who do I want to honor? These are very big questions that
Hmm.
we often
And we
leave
never
unanswered.
associate suicide or ideation or thinking about ending your life with love.
Yeah,
So I love that concept because I
yeah.
think it brings a new perspective to my listeners. Thank you.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about anxiety, Sarah, because oh my goodness, now more than ever, is there anyone who is not anxious? I mean, if you're not anxious right now, you should really worry. You should be worried and anxious about not being anxious. because with everything that we're going through. So I that was the main reason why I came to you and I wanted
Mm,
to interview you, because I know that anxiety is so prevalent in my audience. Those who lost loved ones and those who are thinking
yeah,
about suicide,
yeah,
anxiety is right there all the
yeah.
time. It comes from guilt. Feeds anxiety many times, and it's just this whirlpool of emotions. And so I
Mm,
want to give my audience some tools to how to handle anxiety, and not only how to handle, but also how to see anxiety, because we often think that with many other kinds of what we call bad emotions, right, or uncomfortable emotions, that this is something that is harmful. And that's not what anxiety is. It's actually there to protect you.
yeah.
So I want to hear your view on this, and I wanted to help my audience get a new perspective of what anxiety is.
Mm, it's such a wonderful question. The very first thing we need to know before we go into a little bit of a deeper dive of the neuroscience is that the brain is meant to receive the body's messages. So when the body has an emotional experience, it sends this message up to the integrated emotional map of the body in the right hemisphere. And then our job is basically to understand the body's message. And when we understand the body's message, the body calms. So if we are angry and we go, well, of course I'm angry, then the body calms down. If we're filled with grief and we say to ourselves, well, I've just lost my beloved son to suicide, of course I'm filled with grief. There's an entirely different kind of self accompaniment that happens when we get to name our emotions. That's the first thing we need to understand.
Mhm.
The second thing we need to understand is that if we never give precise words to the emotions that are coming up, then they don't complete and they stay in the body as states, sometimes for decades, which means that it's very interesting about this word anxiety. The word anxiety is actually not precise enough to allow us to complete the body's messages with the brain. The word anxiety can apply to two different, very different kinds of emotions. The first is the fear circuit, which we most often think of as connected with anxiety. But there's a second circuit, emotional circuit, that's connected with anxiety. So there are two main flavors of anxiety that we know about. And these two main flavors occur not just in humans, but in all kinds of mammals. So there's a lot of research that shows that both circuits can be involved, or one or the other circuit can be involved. The second circuit is a circuit that we do not talk about much in North America, and that circuit is the panic grief circuit. And especially in the panic grief circuit, what we don't talk about is the way that we feel when people who we love disappear and we miss them. This is a state called, there's a particular neuroscientist and a studier of emotions named Jaak Panksepp, who was a US fellow, but whose ancestors came from Estonia. That's why he has such a funny name. His first name is spelled Jaak, Jaak
Mhm.
Panksepp. And what he's the fellow who discovered that rats laugh when you tickle them, that
Oh,
there's a super that there's a that they giggle. You can hear them giggling if
oh,
you're recording and looking at all the sound waves. We don't know, we don't hear them because they're out of our range of hearing when they're laughing. But he discovered this. He was a lovely man who died too early, probably because of panic grief. He lost his beloved daughter in a car accident, and I
wow.
don't think he ever recovered. I think his heart was broken, as so many of our hearts are when we lose the people that we love. So the state of alarm that we go into when somebody is missing, when we've lost a family member to suicide, when we have the experience of a family member suddenly trying to or talking about suicidal ideation for the first time, there can be a similar response because it's not it's not just a conversation, it's a threat of loss. This state I call alarmed aloneness. It's not a state that we have a good name for in English, but it is one of the roots of anxiety.
Hmm.
So the experience of anxiety in our bodies, just see everybody out there, find a little place where you have some anxiety in your chest. As Paula mentioned, if you're not feeling anxious right now, you probably need to get worried. But so it probably everybody can find the anxiety in their bodies. Just take a moment, close your eyes, and say to yourself, Self, do I need acknowledgement of alarmed aloneness? And as I touch into that, I can feel the fluttering of a part of me that still misses my son who died of addiction, which is certainly a kind of suicide, when he was about
Mhm.
7 years ago. I can feel that fluttering of missing him, that my body still knows that he's gone. And we can also say to ourselves, Self, do you need acknowledgement of fear? And that brings a little bit of a kind of just a little buzzing over here in my right chest, and a very deep connection to climate and the planet and the
Mhm.
pandemic, and just like a fear for life itself, and especially life as we know it, and all of these beloved children that we're trying to raise and wanting to have good
Yeah.
experiences and good futures.
Mhm.
So our body needs us to be reading it. And a
Mhm.
part of the experience of having anxiety is that we have not yet read our bodies to a point where they can say, oh, yes, this message has been received. Because it may be, I don't know how it was for you, Paula, if you were doing this exercise with me, but our bodies calm when those messages start to be received with some precision and also with warmth. Warmth is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. You were talking. I'm thinking it has to do with acceptance of what you're feeling, acknowledging where it
Mm-hmm.
is and where you feel in your body,
Yeah.
and also understanding. Because I love that you pointed. It's not just about fear. It has to
Yeah.
do with loneliness too,
Hmm.
and that's what we're living now. We're living both
Yeah.
flavors, right, of
Yeah.
anxiety.
And loneliness so often sounds non-specific.
Hmm.
But when we really let ourselves acknowledge, yes, my body does miss the people who have gone. It misses them particularly. Yes, there is a flavor of this anxiety that's actually connected to a specific other person who is no longer here or who has threatened to no longer be here. That can be there
Hmm.
as well. And then, of course, if we're dealing with an active experience of somebody having suicidal ideation who we love, there can be both fear and alarmed aloneness. We can have both experiences at the same time. We're very complex.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit more about the lonely part of it, because I think the fear, for some reason, it's more general knowledge. As you said,
Yeah,
that's what we associate anxiety with, right?
yeah,
But talking about loneliness, and I think for the first time, we see the word loneliness in headlines now.
yes,
And
yes.
that's
People are,
one of the good things about COVID. I see it
yes,
as a good thing
I do too.
because it brought up this issue of loneliness, and also the other side of the coin, which is our need to connect.
Yes, yes. It's been really beautiful to see these articles in mainstream media. Rolling Stone magazine had um, a fabulous article just last month
Mhm.
about it, and I'm realizing that my difficulty here. One moment.
The phone is ringing. That's okay. Okay.
I knocked off my control mechanism at the beginning of the call and disabled my own capacity to respond to emergencies. I beg your pardon. Oh, anxiety.
Uh-huh. I know.
Yes.
That's fine. That's fine.
so, here we are then with this experience of talking about alarmed aloneness and specifically missing people, but also this general acknowledgement of loneliness in our world. And the research that's being shown is that loneliness shortens our lives.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm just now reading Vivek's book, Together. Have you
Oh,
read it?
I haven't read it
It's
yet.
beautiful,
Oh,
beautiful book. It's all about loneliness. So perfect timing, perfect timing. He talks about again how loneliness is in. He says what you just said. It's an alarm system. It's
mm,
telling you that you need to connect. You
yeah.
need relationships in your life. So it's not a bad thing.
No.
Talk to. He says the same thing. Talk to your loneliness and
Mm,
try to try to find other ways and rebuild your life around people who have meaningful relationships with you.
yeah, yeah. Um, I do want to acknowledge that uh, for many of us, this is a tricky invitation. That
Mm-hmm.
that that that
Yes.
that our bodies and ourselves may have experienced moments of moments of very great danger from humans. And
Mm-hmm.
so we may be experiencing an a, a, an alarm, an entirely different, a fear alarm,
Mm-hmm.
with you.
Legitimate, right?
Yes,
Legitimate.
yes,
Yeah.
based on good historical evidence. Yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
humans are not um, are not safe. And so
Mm-hmm.
just to acknowledge that for anybody who had a spurt of alarm with Paula saying, it's just telling us that we need to connect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we get to say to our bodies, yeah, of course we want to connect, and of course we're really ambivalent about it.
Yeah, yeah. So what would you say to someone who is exactly thinking that right now?
Yeah,
Saying,
I
yeah,
would.
but my
Yeah,
experience with, humanity has not been great, to say
yeah,
the
yeah.
least.
I would say, um, is there such a complex arising of emotions when we hear just connect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
just just go forward, go out into the world, make friends, especially now, of course, when the virus has many of us who are vulnerable health wise very shut away and not able to go out in the world. I mean, so there's sort of two groups that we're talking to who might feel really ambivalent. And one is the person going, but I'm trapped in my home. And the other person going, but humans are really dangerous. So for the person who's trapped in their home, I would say, um, is there just like, do we need to know the colors of the experience of the alarm? Is there is there simultaneously a red flare of worry and aversion and the need to be safe health wise, and maybe a deep blue longing, a love of people, a desire for hugs and shoulder bumps and feeling people's bodies around us? I mean, has it gotten so intense that we're even like, I would be with somebody even if they had bad breath? I mean, are we getting to that point of like emotional starvation where we're like, just let me smell body odor. I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
want people around me. Or so that's sort of
Yeah.
like just beginning to acknowledge
Mm-hmm.
the longing and
Yeah.
the simultaneous sort of the push pull of needing to be safe and longing to be connected. So just acknowledging that for those folks. And then for the people who've had trauma with humans, like, well, of course your body isn't sure that you want to connect. Of course your body has that aversion reaction. And do you need any acknowledgement that when we're told, it's very simple, just make friends, that there's a terrible shame that comes as well, just because you've tried and you know that your own body stops you with its fear.
Mm,
And just like being so exquisitely gentle with our scared bodies, like putting our arms around ourselves and saying, of course you're scared, of course you're worried. And the more that we contextualize it for our bodies, the easier time our body has. Like, do you need acknowledgement that when you were 9 years old, things were really bad at home and people almost died? Of
mhm,
course you're scared, but putting it in that context starts to let the body's messages get sorted and contextualized chronologically,
mhm,
because a part of what we're dealing with having lost people to suicide, with having suicidal ideation, with intense anxiety, with intense fear, a part of what we're dealing with is the way that trauma imprints on human brains. And and the amygdala, which is that little organ deep in the brain, if this were the brain in the palm of my hand and this were my
mhm,
spinal column and the brain stem and the limbic system, there's the amygdala in there. And the amygdala doesn't know what time it is. The
mhm,
amygdala has no sense of time. So it's running the brain as if we're still living in our 9-year-old world. And
mhm,
once we start to know that and understand that, then there are different things we can begin to do to help
mhm,
to
mhm,
contextualize the traumas
mhm,
that we've lived through.
mhm.
And to, yeah.
Yes, and Sarah, I was the other thing that comes to my mind too is that when we talk about, well, if it's a sense of danger, if we need connections, let's find them. And we're not talking about just go out in the world and be friendly with everybody and hug everyone. No, little by little, right? Do
Mm-hmm.
it slowly. The other day I was listening to this, I think it was a podcast, and she was talking about how she's an introvert and she always believed that she didn't need anyone and she was okay by herself. She really was not into socializing. And now with the pandemic, she's been quarantining and she said, I had no idea how just saying hello to the person who served me coffee every morning. I would stop at somewhere and get coffee. And just that little exchange, how much I'm missing that.
Mm-hmm.
So it just shows that it's little things. We're not talking about befriend someone for life today, right? But just be aware that these little connections on every day, I go for walks every day. And I love when someone comes my way, we just wave to each other with our masks on. And, I walk my dog and someone comment on my dog. I mean, just these little things. And my dog is gorgeous, of course. And everybody comments on because they all are. But it's these little things that we're just acknowledging that human connection is a positive, can be a positive thing, and can be healing for humans,
Mm.
isn't it?
It's, yeah, such a reminder to all of us to enjoy those moments and to get the life juice out of them.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about the impact. You said, well, we'll leave neuroscience for later on. So let's talk about a little bit. It's a long word. It's can sound a little bit too scientific, but we know it isn't. So can you
Mm.
talk about the impact on the body, on your mental health, on your brain of anxiety?
Yeah. So, the way that anxiety impacts us is that it takes us out of our place of social engagement. So, I invite the audience to think about this description that Paula just gave us of walking her dog and these moments of sweetness. And just notice if in that story, as you participated with Paula, almost like you were being Paula, in the moments of walking the dog and the dog being appreciated. There might have been a relaxation in your body as you kind of traveled on that very pleasing path. And then when you came back to yourself, you may have noticed that your own state of anxiety returned. What anxiety does is it knocks us out of those pleasing experiences of being able to harvest the beauty and warmth of connection. Anxiety takes us in the nervous system into the fight, flight, and what I now call fight, flight, alarmed aloneness. Because when we just say fight, flight, we're implying that the only nervous system states where we become agitated and upset are anger and fear. But we've just been learning that there's a whole other circuit, the circuit of alarmed aloneness, that also can be a part of our experience. So, what happens with anxiety is that we move into the activated state that we probably don't know clearly what state it is, and there we are with elevated heart rate, elevated cortisol, lowered heart rate variability. We're breathing more quickly, we're not breathing deeply, and we're carrying tension in our muscles. And then, of course, we're having the sensation of anxiety. And whenever we have that sensation, the brain gets involved. It's trying to figure out what the heck is the solution for the upset. So we've got an upset body, an activated body, and a brain that's trying to find a solution. Now, we have two hemispheres. We have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. And the two brain hemispheres are different in quite a few ways. They're both simultaneous processors. We can't just be in our left hemisphere or just in our right hemisphere, but
Mm-hmm.
we have tendencies to see the world through one or the other lens. This is important for those of us who have struggled with suicidal ideation or who have lost family members to suicide and feel so bewildered by the loss. The left hemisphere doesn't really understand long-term consequence. The left hemisphere isn't able to receive feedback, and the left hemisphere is not able to experience any kind of mourning. The right hemisphere is able to do these things. It's able to mourn. It's able to see long-term consequence. It understands that suicide might not be the best long-term consequence. But the left hemisphere doesn't understand that. The left hemisphere believes that suicide could be a very good solution to
Mm.
all of the problems, including problems of intense anxiety. It's like the left hemisphere imagines death as just a turning off of the light switch. It doesn't understand all of the impacts and ramifications that are a part of the action of leaving this life and leaving
Mm-hmm.
people behind, and the effect that it has on people, and also just like the beauty of our own lives that may be unfolding that we are not there to be with. So, a part of what's happening with our anxiety is the body says, there's a problem. And the brain says, I need to fix this problem.
Because that's
And
what the brain does, right? It,
that's what the
it it
brain
fixes
does.
it. It protects us.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And because the right hemisphere is the hemisphere that carries both our present day and our transgenerational trauma effects, if we have not been warmly accompanied, then the right hemisphere doesn't get organized in a way that it can support the left hemisphere. So it's like the right hemisphere is crippled and diminished by trauma. And then the left hemisphere is trying to figure it out. And for the left hemisphere, suicide is a good option because it has no capacity to really understand either death or or endings or
Or the consequences
other
of ending and
consequences of
deaths.
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a part of what happens in our healing journey, even just listening to Paula and me today, beloved audience, you are actually having us awaken your right hemisphere. And Paula's ongoing warmth and care for you is actually reaching into the right hemisphere. And over time, it's actually changing people's brains. So, this is kind of a beautiful thing about the way that we are in relationship with our audiences
Mm-hmm.
and how we bring them warmth and care and love and beauty and understanding and self-compassion. So
Mm-hmm.
all of these things are things that are remedies for the trauma field, the unregulated and unheld trauma field of the right hemisphere. And as we go, then we can even begin to step through time and space and accompany the past selves who experienced trauma
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
and
we and
change
you
them.
you talked about the brain, but that we're talking about the body too. All that
Yeah,
tension is down
yeah,
your body, and it's
yeah,
affecting all your organs
yeah.
because there's no separation, right?
No
How does it
separation.
affect the body? Can you just give us so?
Yeah.
Because and I'll give you my own story. I had depression after my dad died, and when I went to the doctor, I knew that there was something wrong, but the first thing I told him was, and he did well. He actually asked me, he said, "Well, are you feeling any pain in your body?" And I said, "I've had this back pain. I've changed my mattress once. It doesn't help, and I was in a lot of pain. Oh,
Oh,
my back was hurting a lot, and I had never associated that to the depression." Because when you read in books all the symptoms, you go, tension, changing mood, changing maybe become aggressive. It's all about behavior.
yeah.
And when he told me, don't worry, it's going to help with your pain too, because most
Mm.
people with depression have some kind of physical pain. And I
Oh,
was astonished. Just really, I didn't know that. And I was studying this thing for months after the death of my
mm.
father. So and actually, when I started taking medication, I did treatment for 1 year, and I've been fine since then. The first thing that I felt, my back pain was gone.
Oh, that's delightful.
Before it affected my mood, it affected the
Mm.
pain. So it's just to show that
Wonderful.
it's the whole system.
Yes, it is. So cortisol impacts our organs and ages us and impacts our immune system. It impacts the heart. If we take a look at hearts that have been badly affected by stress and by loneliness, they actually look worse than chronic long-term smokers' hearts.
Wow, really?
Yeah, our body really takes a hit from stress and loneliness and anxiety. Another thing that we need to know, especially when we've lost someone suddenly, is that the heart can actually change shape. So, if there's a sudden loss of a loved one, which there so often is with suicide, there's a period of time during which the heart, instead of looking like a regular heart, changes its shape and elongates and shifts and starts to look like a Japanese fishing pot for octopus. There's even a
There is
word in
there's a
Japanese
word
for
for
this.
that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And we can feel like a physical pain in our chests from the heart trying to figure out how to exist in its new shape within the old space that our body had made for it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are experiencing extreme pain in your chest after losing somebody you love, you get to be with that heart usually it'll come back to its regular shape in 2 to 3 months, I think. But just to know that is helpful, because sometimes we can be like, what the heck is going on with my body? Why does my heart
Mm-hmm.
hurt so much? My heart is broken, and literally and figuratively our hearts are broken
Mm-hmm.
by
Mm-hmm.
death.
Sarah, I think you have been so clear and so helpful. Thank you for explaining in such easy language. Sometimes you talk to someone who has written books and they're so good, but talking is a different thing, and not everyone can express themselves so easily and for general public like you. So thank you for that. And I want to end by giving my audience, because now we understand what anxiety is, the impact it has on our lives, relationships, how it affects your body, it ages you, all of that. Can we give them some tools for those
Yes,
who
the
are feeling okay? I see myself in this episode. I mean, I
yeah,
have all of it.
yes.
So can we give them something to do? And I know that meditation, and I get this question often. I'm sure you've heard this many times. Meditation is one of the things that we know is extremely effective for. And when I say meditation, it's not going into the Himalayas and staying there
No.
in a cave, right? Because
No.
that's the image that we Westerners have still of meditation. But when you have anxiety, many people will say, well, but I can't concentrate. I can't do
Right.
meditation because I have anxiety. So how, so how can I do that? So I would like
Yeah.
for you to explain that to my audience and give them
Yes,
tools.
sure. First of all, there are a series of free meditations. You can put me into Insight Timer and put in the name Sarah Peyton and find my meditations on
Well,
Insight
that's good
Timer.
to know, because I use it. I just did last night. I use
Oh,
Insight Time all the time. It's
yeah.
an app, just for those who don't know. It's called Insight Timer. It's an app. You just download, and there are many. I used last night for insomnia. I was having
Uh-huh.
sleep and said, okay.
Yeah.
And it took me 3 minutes, maybe. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I just fell asleep.
Oh,
It
so
helps a lot.
beautiful.
So I'll find you. I'll look you up.
Oh, very good. So those are for free. And then on my website also, there's a download for free for the meditation. So my website is yourresonantself.com. And they're guided meditations, which makes it a little easier than just turning yourself loose with no instructions. And also, if you just do even one breath a day, I mean, you don't even have to do, you know, we only can do what we can do. Our anxious bodies knock us off track. Our anxious brains running and running on their hamster wheels of trying to figure out how to deal with our anxious bodies knock us off track. But just one breath a day is a beautiful start. Just one breath where we're paying attention to our breath and we're having warmth for ourselves. But the most important thing for our audience is that they begin to see if it's possible to have affection and warmth for themselves. So here we are, here,
Self-compassion. Self-compassion.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Here we are, anxious body, intense like electrical activity in the chest. Haven't yet figured out how to name it with enough precision that it calms. And so we circle our body with affection. We go, no matter how anxious you are, Sarah, I love you, or I like you, or I have warmth for you. Or if those are all too hard, then we say, no matter how much anxiety you have, I respect you. Your anxiety makes sense. I haven't figured it out yet, but it makes sense. I honor you for this journey. Any way that we can place a warm kind of cloud bath of some kind of holding of the self, and that might merge into the anxiety, and then we put another layer around, and that might merge into the anxiety, and we put another layer around, and we kind of can see how far out we have to get to be able to hold the enormity of the anxiety that we're experiencing, because so often if we actually were able to look at it, our anxiety would be much bigger than our bodies. And
Mhm.
sometimes we need to get our affection and our warmth and our acceptance out far enough to hold this sort of field of anxiety that we may be carrying.
And do use the meditation. I can guarantee it works. I
Yeah.
just had a patient this week, and I was showing her how to do the breathing properly, because there is
Mm.
a better way. Let's say I was showing her, and I said, download Insight Timer, go because she's having a hard time sleeping too. So go
Mm.
to sleep because you can. There are themes there, and she was very open to that. But sometimes it is hard for some people to understand that and to actually accept that meditation works. It took me a long time to, and it does work. And it doesn't mean it will work the first time because your body's not used to it. It's going to go back to its old habits, which is normal and expected. But give it a chance. It does
Mm.
work. Sarah, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you,
You
Paula.
are so warm. You have this great energy. I'm so
Mm.
glad, and I'm sorry I'm not there in person,
Me
but it
too.
is, yeah. But we'll meet each other at some point when this
I
is
look
over.
forward to it.
Thank
Mm.
you.
Thank you,
Be
Paula.
safe.